bird watching would be a good hobby to keep his mind sharp and get him out in the great outdoors. The hobby has grown into a passion that has taken him birding across the globe to 5 continents and numerous countries in Asia, Europe, Central America, South America, throughout the US and Canada, and also to New Zealand. He served on the board of the Golden Eagle Audubon Society for 6 years and is a member of the Southwest Idaho Birders Association. Alexander enjoys sharing his knowledge and his photos with others and frequently gives presentations on the birds of countries he's visited. One of his favorite places is right here in the Treasure Valley. So without further ado, Alexander Sapiens.
Good morning. Spring has arrived and so have the birds. So this presentation hopefully will enable you to how about the PowerPoint?
Yeah, okay.
So this presentation will enable you to see and identify most of the birds in Boise.
Steve, can you give him screen sharing privileges, please?
I don't know how he lost it.
Yeah, okay, here we go.
So, okay.
Lisa,
Yeah,
when I gave him screen sharing privileges, it disconnected you. It used to allow me to have 2 or 3 co-hosts.
no problem, no problem.
But
Okay.
I can give him screen sharing privileges without co-host.
Okay,
I'll have to
Okay, so
go work on that.
here we go. This is going to be a virtual birding trip, and we will review the common birds found in the Treasure Valley. And these birds are presented in the same order in which they are found in the Field Guide to Boise Birds, which is a very small field guide that you can get just about anywhere, any of the bird feed stores or the Idaho or the Boise Parks and Rec. And so I'm basically following the sequence of this book, even though that doesn't really follow the normal bird guides. Okay. And but my go-to field guide is the National Geographic Field Guide to Birds of North America. And normally I would set up the presentation of birds based on this particular bird guide, which, as I said, is my go-to bird guide. And you can also get an Idaho bird list, which is available through the Golden Eagle Audubon Society. It looks something like this. And then there are a lot of birding spots in Boise. That's one of the great things about this area is there are so many places that you can go. Now, one of the things that I did do is I added a little bee over here after some of the spots, because when you get older, you want to know where the bathrooms are. And so these are the spots that have bathrooms. But other than that, I extended it to Lucky Peak. The book actually doesn't go that far east and goes to about Barber Pool, and then Hammer Flat, Marianne Williams Park, which is one of my favorite parks, not just because it has bathrooms, but it's just a great birding spot. And then across the river is Barber Park. And then I just put in the Boise River Greenbelt because there are so many spots along the river. And then up in the foothills is Hulls Gulch, and then Hyatt Wetlands. So there's there are probably 25 birding spots in Boise that you can go to. Most parks are good birding spots. Idaho Fish and Game came out with this Idaho birding trail. There are 4 of them. This is the Southwest region. And again, you can get this at Idaho Fish and Game. And it looks something like this. And so this shows Barbara Park, Julia Davis Park, and Catherine Albertson Park. And then I just put in Lytle Gulch, which is the most eastern one. And you can actually see, and the advantage of this is it gives you the GPS points, but it also tells you what you can expect to see there. Okay, so moving right along. Okay. Oops. I put in a key because below the names of the birds, I put in a PR, SR, and WR, which means permanent resident, summer resident, and winter resident. So that's when you expect to see them. Although the summer resident ones will actually start coming in the spring, many of them, like the red-winged blackbird, started arriving in February. And now we're getting more and more. The turkey vultures has now arrived. And then they'll start leaving in the fall, starting in August. And so we're going to start with the waterfowl. And I'm just going to take them in this order. And I added Canada goose. I don't know why it wasn't in the book, but it should have been. Even though Canada goose is not a duck. Okay, American widgeon. Okay, the American widgeon is a dabbling duck. They tip their butts up and they feed near the top of the water. And as you can see, they have this this green band across the eye. Whoops. And they have a blue bill, light colored bill. And they don't quack. They have a kind of a funny squeaky sound. But the other distinctive area is their butt. And I'm circling the butt with my pointer. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next one is the Bufflehead. This is actually the smallest duck. And it's actually a diving duck. And I included this picture because it shows the colors of the head. Although most of the time when you see it, the Bufflehead will just look black and white. Okay? And then the female, I didn't include the female, but the female will have a white cheek spot right in here. And this is a cinnamon teal, and they definitely are cinnamon. And they tend to be in shallow ponds and around mud. The gadwall is kind of like the mallard. It's a dabbling duck. And this would be, I'd say, the second most common duck that we will see. Okay. And then 2 of the winter ducks that we're going to be seeing. First one is the Barrows Golden Eye. I've only seen them in the winter. And these are males, and they have a crescent spot behind the beak or bill. Okay, diving duck. This is the common golden eye, and its white spot is circular or more oval shaped, if you will. And but both sexes have golden eyes or yellow eyes, but you can see the female in this one isn't as colorful as the male. Okay, and this is the hooded merganser. Hooded merganser is actually a very small duck, and it has a very small pointy bill. But what's distinctive is, I did? I skipped the mallard, sorry. Okay, our most common duck is the Mallard Duck. It's probably one of the most colorful ducks. And the male is the only duck that has what I call the Elvis curl in the tail here. And so, and they have orange legs and feet, okay? And later in the summer, actually it'll be, I'd say July, August, they'll go, they'll start molting or changing their colors. And this beautiful bird will become very much like the female. But the way you tell them apart is the color of the bill never changes. So it'll always have a yellow bill, whereas the female has kind of a orange, dirty looking bill. Okay. And by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but the dabbling ducks, like the mallards and the gadwalls, can walk on land. And the diving ducks cannot, because their legs are further back, and therefore you almost never see them on land, except perhaps when they're nesting. Northern shoveler are very common and very interesting because they have kind of a curved bill. You can kind of see it a little bit in the female, and their bills are as long as their heads. And they have little teeth-like characteristics in their teeth, and they will feed right along just under the surface of the water, and they tend to move around when they're feeding in a circular motion or movement, so that if you ever see these individually or in large groups, they will be moving in circles. And generally that means they're feeding, which I think is very interesting. Okay, one of the most elegant ducks is the northern pintail. And again, it's a large duck, and the male has a beautiful white line that goes up past the back of the head. Just very elegant. And now we're into the ringneck duck, which is the diving duck. The last three were dabbling ducks. The ringneck, there are actually two ducks that look very similar, the ringneck duck and the lesser scaup. But the way you tell them apart is the ringneck duck has a ring on its bill. Personally, I think they should have been called the ring-billed duck, because you really cannot see the ring on the neck. And it also has a white line right here, just behind the black, and the scaup doesn't have that. And then with the females, and again, females look almost alike, but the female ringneck duck has the ring on the bill, and it has a prominent white eye ring, whereas the scaup does not, the female scaup does not. And that's how you would tell them apart. And then the other thing is that the shape of the head is kind of unusual, I think, and that these ringneck ducks have kind of a pointed head. Okay, now we're to the ruddy duck, and they're also called spine tails because their tails stick up in the air, and they're a small duck. And the male on the left in breeding season has a very bright blue bill. So, but the coloring, the black, white, and then brown like that, will remain year round, but the bill will change colors. And so later on, it'll become more like the female bill over here on the right. Now we're to the wood duck, which is probably one of the most beautiful ducks. And we have a lot of them here in Boise. And I was totally amazed when I spotted one high up in a tree. And so they truly do. They nest in cavities in trees and they will perch up high in the tree. And it's just kind of amazing. But the male is very attractive. Female is very distinctive because of her white eye ring. And generally you can tell that they're always together. And then we have our most common goose, the Canada goose. And we see them here all year round. But it turns out a few years ago, they actually banded a lot of the geese to see if they would migrate. And it turns out that a lot of our geese here in the Boise area will migrate south, and then geese from further north will migrate into Boise and spend the winter here. So we do have geese year round, Canada geese. Although, truth be told, I have never had one come to our backyard. Whereas with the mallard ducks, I've had as many as a dozen hit our ground feeders and just literally empty them. Okay, now we're going to get into the herons and their allies. The double-crested cormorant is not a heron. And when it flies, this curved neck will be in a very straight line, but they're very common on the Boise River. And in breeding season, they will have these crests, as you can see on the bird on the left. I've never seen this crest in Boise because generally in the winter, they'll migrate south and it's during their breeding that the crest is more prominent. Okay, but a very common river bird, if you will, and they only eat fish. And this is the great blue heron. It's our largest heron, and they're very common here. In fact, we have 2 rookeries along the Boise River where you can see them. One is near Barber Park, and near Barber Park we were walking, and I think this is either a steelhead or a trout on the bird on the left.
On the right.
On the right, take that back. On the right, and I would say that fish had to have been 18 to 20 inches long. And I photographed this bird for maybe 30 minutes because it was trying to swallow the fish and it couldn't get it into its throat. And finally, it occurred to it to put it in the water. And it actually got it down into the water. And then it swallowed the fish. And it was hard to believe that it could get a fish that big down its throat, but it in fact did. And so, but I'm only showing a couple of pictures of each bird. So I could have shown you a series of slides where this fish actually went down. It was amazing. And this is a great egret. You get these in the summer, and they tend to be bridle foragers in shallow water near the edge of the river. And this particular one has a fish, not nearly as big as the one with the great blue heron. And it's just caught it, and it's, as you can see, that fish is sideways. But when herons and egrets swallow their prey, they will always turn the fish head first. They always go down head first. We do have grebes, but the most common grebe that we have is the pied-bill grebe. And pied-bill means that it's a bicolored bill. And we do have many of these. Hyatt, the Hyatt Reserve would probably be the easiest place to find one of these. They're generally in ponds. And then this year has been a very good year for coots. They tend to be here year round. And in spring, they'll have their little ones. And the babies are actually quite cute because they're all red. And they are not a duck. As you can see, they have a white bill. And then the frontal plate has a red dot. And the eyes tend to be red. But I included the picture on the right because they don't have webbed feet. They have webbed toes. And so, and you can kind of see the webbed toes. Now we're going to get into the shorebirds. Generally, they're in mud or on rocks. And one of the most common ones is the black-necked stilt. And it does have a black neck, and it always has this white above the eye. But what's most prominent are those long red legs. So if you see a bird with really long legs, it's a black-necked stilt. And then another very common bird here in the valley is the killdeer. And and they're actually in the plover family, and they're one of the largest plovers, not the largest, but one of the largest ones. And they have a double ring, and that's how you can tell them. And we also have spotted sandpipers, mostly in the summer. And when we get them in the summer, they don't have their spots. But in the south, they would be spotted because they would be breeding in the south, not here. And but this particular sandpiper has a very unusual behavior. As it walks, it bobs its tail up and down. And so I'm bilingual. So in Spanish, it's really called a butt bobber because it has this funny habit of bobbing its tail up and down. And so even if you saw it at a far distance and you saw a bird bobbing its tail up and down, it would be the spotted sandpiper. Now, another large bird that we get are the Wilson snipe. And they're not common. They're generally in grassy areas. And this one, I was driving down a dirt road with Al Larson, and he said, stop. And so I stopped, and he said, look to your left. And sure enough, there was this Wilson snipe standing on a post. So I lowered the car window and took the picture of this particular bird and standing on a post. And they have a kind of a very interesting mating habit of flying high up into the air and then dropping down and making an unusual sound with their wings. And it'll be kind of a U-shaped sound, or U-shaped pattern in flying. So it'll go high, come down, go back up in big U patterns. And so, but again, mostly in grassy areas near water. And this is a Virginia rail. And this one, I took this picture at, I just pulled a blank on the place. But anyway, it was down in a creek, and for some reason it occurred to me to call it, and there were maybe 30 of us on the path. And I called it once, and it came out of the reeds and walked up to all of us and walked in between us and then back down into the reeds again. And I was totally blown away that this bird was not shy about coming to look at all these people that were looking at it. and all those for clicking pictures of this crazy Virginia rail. And but it's found primarily in marshlands or in what I call riparian areas. Okay, now we're going to get into the gulls. We have two. The ring-billed gull is actually an inland or an interior freshwater gull. And it's very easy to identify because of the ring on its bill. And these are adults. And so this is what is called a 3-year gull. And by the time their 3rd year, they become adults. And they have yellow feet and yellow bills. Okay, and a yellow eye with kind of a red eye ring. You can kind of see it on both of these. Okay, so then we have the California gull, and you can find this in the Great Basin or in on the coast. But they do come to Idaho because we're kind of at the northern edge of the Great Basin. But 70% of these gulls actually nest on the Great Salt Lake, and probably another 20% nest in Mono Lake. So on the Great Salt Lake on the eastern side of the Great Basin, and Mono Lake on the western side of the Great Basin. And so truth be told, I think they should have called this the Utah gull, because most of them live and come from Utah, not California. So, and you can tell them from the, you can easily tell them apart from the ring-billed gull because they have this red spot right here under the bill, and their back is much darker. So I'm going to flip back, light and then dark. And then when they have their chicks, this is kind of interesting behavior. The chick will peck at that red spot. And when it does, the adult gull will open its mouth and then the chick will feed from the food that the gull has, which I found fascinating. Now we're going to get into the hummingbirds. And this is an Anna's hummingbird. And their color varies with the way they're turned to the light. And they're primarily a coastal bird. You primarily find them on the Pacific coast. But this year, we've been finding one that has stayed the entire year in Hall's Gulch, which is over by the north end of Boise. And so we were there, I think it was near the 1st of February, and we found an Anna's hummingbird, and it was like 17 degrees. It was, I couldn't believe that this bird actually survived the winter because it does need nectar, but it also needs insects. It needs the protein to live. And so somehow or other, it was finding insects in order to live, because it would, if it were relying only on nectar, like in feeders, it would starve to death. The next one, and our most common hummingbird, is the black-chinned hummingbird. And again, it's mostly in the riparian areas near water. And as you can see, the whole head is black, not just the chin. And this is the male adult. And then the Calliope hummingbird is our smallest hummingbird. This hummingbird weighs about as much as a dime. You know, we're talking very small, but they can flare up and show their throat in a very colorful way. And again, in riparian thickets. And then this is the Rufus hummingbird, which is the only hummingbird that is starting to spread across the United States. Most hummingbirds are either eastern birds or western birds. But they're starting to find the Rufus Hummingbird in the eastern part of the United States. And it usually migrates from the south all the way to Alaska. So they'll come through. And if you ever see one, and they're brown like this on the bottom, and they are a very aggressive bird. In fact, if they're around a feeder, they will push all the other hummingbirds away. And so if you see a feisty, very aggressive hummingbird, more than likely, it's a Rufus Hummingbird. And then this is a common nighthawk. We see them in the summer, and they're insectivores. They're in the evening, they're out gathering up insects. And I'm sure they eat their weight in insects every day. But during the day, these birds sleep on tree branches. And if you'll notice the bird on the left, it's taking a snooze on a branch, and it's just parallel to the branch. And unless you know to look for it, you won't see it. It just blends right into the branch. But in the evening, you'll find it flying around, and it has this distinctive swept back wings with the white wing bars, okay, and a white chin. And so if you see it flying around, you see those wing bars, it's not an owl and it's not a hawk. It's the common nighthawk. Now we're going to get into the raptors, which are probably the most popular birds in our area because we have so many of them. And this is the bald eagle, the national bird. And usually you find them around the rivers, water, and they're not afraid to steal food from other birds. And they're actually quite large. I think they have to be about 4 years old before they get this distinctive white head and white tail. But it's the only raptor that I know that has a white head and white tail. So if you see it in the sky with white on both ends and this humongous bill, it's a bald eagle. Okay, and very common along the Boise River. And this is a Cooper's hawk, and it's kind of a year-round bird. And in fact, we always have one in our backyard because we have ground feeders for our smaller birds. But the Cooper's hawk tends to think of it as its buffet. And it will come down and partake of the few finches and sparrows that we have. And so at least one a day, I'd say. And what's distinctive about this bird is it has kind of an angry look. And if you see this eyebrow, it's down low and it has kind of an angry look. It also will catch birds in trees, and it uses long tail to, like a rudder, it'll guide it through the tree branches. And the Cooper's hawk, it has a rounded tail. Now, the reason I'm going into that is because now we're getting into the sharp-shinned hawk, which looks just like the Cooper's hawk, only it's smaller. And it has, like on the right, it has these long, skinny legs, hence sharp-shinned, and it's smaller. And the tail is not quite rounded and almost has a little V in there, okay? And then the other thing is, if you look at the head, this is the other key thing, you'll see that it has kind of a happy look, whereas the Cooper's has an angry look. And so by just looking at its face, you can tell Cooper's hawk from the sharp-shinned hawk. And the sharp-shinned is small. Although with hawks, the males are smaller than the females. And And so an adult male Cooper's hawk would be about the same size as a female sharp-shinned hawk. So size sometimes will throw you. Okay? And again, this bird is perched on our hanging feeder or on the shepherd's hook. And it also comes and feeds in our backyard. And we have osprey, and they do nest up here in the summer. And they've created these high platforms for them that will enable them to build their nests. And its old name was fish hawk because osprey only eat fish. And I think that when they grab a fish with those claws, they probably kill it because their claws are so strong. And then when they're carrying the fish will always be head first toward the head of the osprey. And then when they land and they eat the fish, this seems weird to me, they eat the head of the fish first. So they'll start at the head of the fish and work their way down. And it's just kind of amazing to me that these osprey are so common. And they do another thing that I find fascinating is they'll go over a river or a pond and they will kite, meaning that they'll flap their wings kind of stationary in the air while they're looking down into the water for a fish. And then they will dive. And unlike other birds, when they grab their fish or prey, they never grab it with their bill or beak. They always grab it with their feet. So when they dive, they will drop down and hit the water feet first. And then our most common hawk, if you see a hawk in the air, in our area, more than 40% of them will be red-tailed hawks, if they're a buteo. Buteo means broad-winged hawk. And so if you see them in the air flying like this, the key identifying mark would be the red tail. But again, they would have to be at least 3 years old to have that red tail. So the young ones don't have the red tail. So how do you tell a younger red-tailed hawk? Well, if they're perched, they will have a belly band like this one. If they're in the air, they will always have dark areas at the leading edge of the wings. So if you see a hawk with a dark head and then dark in the front part of the wing, the leading edge of the wing, it's a red-tailed hawk. Now, the other large buteo or broad-winged hawk that we get, which comes in the summer, and by the way, the red-tailed hawk is here year-round. The Swainson's hawk migrate all the way to South America, and then they come back and nest here in the summer. And they're primarily insectivores. They primarily eat grasshoppers and big insects. And the way to tell them apart when they're flying is the back of the wing is dark rather than the front of the wing. Red-tailed hawk, front of the wing is dark. Swainson's hawk, the back of the wing is dark. And there's a lot of variation with the head. This one has a white throat. Most are dark like this one. But again, you can see the dark on the trailing edge of the wing. And then now we're going to get into the falcons, and the cutest falcon, I think, is the smallest one. And this is the American kestrel. Excuse me, the American kestrel, this is a male, by the way, and they're starting to decline in numbers on the East Coast, whereas they seem to be holding their own on the West Coast. In our area, they put out a lot of kestrel boxes. They're a cavity dweller. And so you'll find that there'll be a lot of boxes and trees. And generally the boxes will be for kestrels and for wood ducks. And the other one would be the Western Screech Owl. But generally, the boxes that are near an open, near trees and then an open area will be the ones that the American kestrel will use. And beautiful bird. And then they're about the size of a mourning dove. And so sometimes when you see them up on the wire, one of the easy ways to tell them apart is that this particular bird will always sit upright in a vertical position, whereas the mourning dove will have a horizontal position. And then another small falcon that we get here is the merlin. And it's just a tad larger than the American kestrel. But again, you'll find it in trees near open areas. And then the largest falcon, and the one that we're most known for, is the Peregrine Falcon. In fact, I think it's kind of funny that the Idaho state bird is the mountain bluebird, which tends to nest above 4,000 feet. So we don't find them here because we're at about 3,000 feet. But on the Idaho quarter, they have the Peregrine Falcon. And so this one, this mallard stripe is very broad and very dark. And it almost looks like the entire head is dark. And they can dive and fly at over 90 miles an hour. So they actually have 2 eye coverings. So when they're diving, okay? And so, and they're quite common. And we used to have one nesting in the downtown area. And in fact, they like to live in canyon areas. And one of their most common prey are what we call rock pigeons, or normal everyday pigeons. And so in downtown areas, in cities, you'll find them using city skyscrapers for nesting, and then they'll swoop down in between the streets of skyscrapers and hit the pigeons down in the parks. And so they're very good at suppressing pigeons. That's their favorite food. And then we have the great horned owl. And it's probably our most common owl. In fact, we've had them in the evening come and roost on our light pole. And so at dusk, if there are birds crazy enough to be out feeding, the great horned owl will quietly swoop down and have dinner. And then I spotted this pair of small great horned owls. They're big fluff balls. And so usually they'll have 1 or 2 when they have their babies. And this one was 2. And so they do very well. And they actually they start nesting early. And so this is about May, and these babies are about this size. And in another month, they'll be adult size. Now we have the Western Screech Owl. And I actually took this picture at a juniper tree at Idaho Fish and Game office. And RL and I went down to get some information at Idaho Fish and Game, and we noticed that the small Tweety birds were just going nuts in this one tree. And I said, you know, yeah, I'm amazed at how hyper they are. And RL said, you know, I will bet that there's an owl nearby. And so we walked over, and sure enough, there was this Western Screech Owl. And when they roost, they almost always roost very close to the tree trunk, as this one is. So if you're looking for a Screech Owl, look near the trunk, whereas the great horned owl will be further away from the trunk. And by the way, a lot of people will put out roosting boxes and they will nest in those. And this is actually one of my favorite birds. It's the turkey vulture, probably the very interesting bird. Oh, and they're just now arriving. And when you see them in the sky, they'll be soaring. They'll look like a very large, dark raptor, but the tail or the trailing edge of the wings will be white, like this. But this is what they look like standing on the ground, close up. And they're great cleanup crew. Now, they're the only bird that I know of that can eat an animal that has the hantavirus or the bubonic plague virus, and their stomach acids are so strong that they can actually destroy that virus. It's the only animal that I know that can destroy that virus. And so I think they're handy to have around. And I know that in Africa, people started killing the vultures. And once the numbers became so low that they were having pandemics from the different viruses because the birds weren't there to clean up. So great cleanup crew. So now we're going to get into the doves and the game birds. And they're not the most common, but they're trying to be. And that's the Eurasian Collard Dub. And they have a square tail that's white. And they have this black collar right here. And they come from Europe and Asia, hence Eurasian Collard Dub. But they crossed through Northern Africa over to the Caribbean and about 15 years ago. And they've been making their way north. And so I would say 5 years ago, they weren't very common here. Now they're quite common, but they're also finding them now in Alaska. And so they're spreading. And one of the reasons they spread is because they can have 4 clutches of eggs every year. By the way, beautiful bird, ugly call. So if you hear them call, it's a horrendous call. And if you check game birds in Idaho Fish and Game, this is the only bird that has no season. You can hunt them year round, and there is no daily limit. You can shoot as many as you want. Nonetheless, this bird is doing quite well here in Idaho. And then our indigenous bird is the mourning dove. And it has kind of a spotted back. That's the reason I use this one. This one was at the edge of the house, and it was in the winter, and that's why it's all fluffed up. because the birds in the cold will fluff up their feathers and essentially insulate themselves. And then if you look very closely, it has a blue eye ring. Okay. And then the bird on the right, I included to show you that it has a very long tail, unlike the other dove. And then this is a rock pigeon. And this pigeon occurs or lives everywhere that people live. Now, Lisa and I have been to South America, to China, New Zealand, throughout the United States and Mexico, and you find rock pigeons. And these pigeons are very widespread. And so wherever you go, you can see a pigeon. And most people just call them pigeons. But if you go over to the Snake River Gorge, you will find them nesting in the rocks, and hence rock pigeon. Now, this is a California quail. This is a picture taken in my backyard. And the bird on the right is actually the adult. And the bird on the left is also a male, but it's not quite an adult. But it's getting there. It's almost adult-like. And the adult will generally perch up high and act as a lookout. And they're very beautiful birds. And then but they originally come from California, and they've actually driven out our indigenous bird, which is a mountain quail. But this is the quail that you will most commonly find here in the Boise area. By the way, there are two more birds on the left, and those are females, of course, and they have a much smaller crest, and they're more brown-like. Okay. So, and they do come in year-round and feed in our yard. We enjoy them. They're kind of like little chickens. And then you can also get wild turkeys, and you can see that these two turkeys here are both male because of their, I've forgotten the name of of their throat, whereas the others are females. And they tend to flock in groups. And what's funny is even though they're common, I don't have a very good picture of them because they are very wily. And as soon as you get even 50 yards from one, they'll start moving away. So most of my pictures have been long distance pictures of wild turkeys. Now we're going to get into the woodpeckers and kingfishers. This is the smallest woodpecker, and we have them, and they generally, the downy woodpecker will generally be down low. And I learned something new on Wednesday when we were out birding. And by the way, you can go birding with the Wednesday Morning Club with Golden Eagle Audubon every other Wednesday. And but one of the things that RL pointed out was the downy woodpecker, and generally you'll see them with their back to you like this, and they always have this white back. And the downy has a T shape on the neck like this. And then their bill is quite small, very small, and they're small. Okay? They're smaller than a robin. And then we have the hairy woodpecker, which has a more prominent bill, almost twice the size and thicker than the hairy woodpecker. I mean the downy woodpecker. But I couldn't find a picture of the back of a hairy woodpecker. But we were looking at them, and on the hairy woodpecker, that, I'm gonna go back. This T is like a cross. And so in the male hairy woodpecker, this center area would be black. And so you would see this black cross. Whereas in the downy, you would see a T. So one of the easy ways to identify them is looking at their bill and their size. Their one is much smaller than the other. But again, when you're looking out there in real life, it's very hard to tell size. But the bill is almost as long as the head. Okay? And the bill is much thicker or bulkier. And then our most common woodpecker, I think, is the northern flicker. And the bird on the right is a male. It has this red right here, whereas the female on the left doesn't have it. And they both have a black bib. And when they fly, you'll see red along the tail. And so the western flickers, western northern flickers, are called red-shafted northern flickers. And the ones on the east of the Rocky Mountains, are called yellow-shafted because this area will be yellow. And their nickname in the east is yellow hammer. So, and every once in a while, like somebody said, they saw a yellow-shafted northern flicker last week here in Boise. I have yet to see one. Although I did see one once in Oregon several years ago. And then we have one of the largest kingfishers and the only kingfisher in the northern part of the United States and the only one in Idaho, and that's the belted kingfisher. And something unusual about the kingfishers is that the male bird generally is the more colorful bird. But with the kingfishers, the bird on the left is the female, and she has this brown or rufous belly band, and then the gray breastband, whereas the male only has the gray breastband. And then they have kind of a lot of times you won't see them, but you will hear them. They have kind of a rattle. I call it a rattle, kind of a sound, and I've only seen them on the Boise River. And so around the river, they're generally there. They generally eat fish, small fish. But this is the belted kingfisher. Now we're going to get into the flycatchers. And this is the willow flycatcher. It's small and it has a very subdued eye ring. It's very hard to see. And their wing bars, again, are very subdued. And this one looks like its bill is all gray or dark, but it in fact has a very light lower bill. Okay, small. And then we have the Sace Phoebe. They're just about, they're not quite as large as a robin, a little smaller. And they have kind of a brown breast. And in fact, for a couple of years, we had them nesting in our courtyard. They made a mess of the courtyard, but Lisa insisted on feeding these Sace Phoebes. And so we still have an occasional Phoebe that will come back and roost in our courtyard. But this is the Sace Phoebe. It's a flycatcher. And generally you'll see them finding a high spot, and that's where they will roost. And this is the Western Kingbird. There are about 4 kingbirds in North America. Ours is the Western. They all look alike, And some of them you can't tell apart except by call. But the Western Kingbird you can tell apart from the others because the outer tail wings, tail feathers are white. So it's the only kingbird that has white on the outer retroces or outer tail feathers. Okay. And now we're into the Western wood pewee. And again, the wood pewee is a little larger than that willow flycatcher. And again, no eye ring at all. And just kind of a dull brown. Now we're into the vireos and corvids. This is the warbling vario. All the vireos will have this white eyebrow that goes up along the bill and then up and around the eye. And the warbling vireo will generally have a little splash of yellow under the wing here on the flanks of the bird. Okay, and the wing, all the other vireos have prominent wing bars, and the warbling vireo does not. And this is the black-billed magpie eating a worm. And most people, when they see the magpie, they think of it as black and white. But in fact, all these wing feathers are blue. But they look black, and the tail also is blue, but again, it tends to look black. But it, again, is one of my favorite birds because they're part of the cleanup group. They will eat carrion. And so, and oddly enough, we feed our family of magpies that comes around about every other day. And any meat scraps that we have what we call the magpie bowl. And they'll come and clean it up. The only problem is, especially during summer, if we put too much food out there, they will take it and they will hide it in the grass and among the flowers. And so when we're out there, we have to watch out for these hidden caches that the magpies have made in our backyard. This is American crow. This is more of an urban bird. And we see this it's the most common corvid in downtown Boise. You won't find too many ravens. Now, they have kind of a long, narrow bill, and their tail tends to be somewhat square, especially when it's flying. Okay, all black bird, fairly large. And then we'll get to the raven. If you'll notice, the bill is much bulkier, much bigger bill. And it's a bigger bird. And it has more feathers along the throat. But again, flying, what's distinctive is the tail is triangular here, not square. So the way to distinguish the raven from the crow is by its tail. Now we're going to get into the swallows. We have 5 of them that come here to Idaho. And the first one is the bank swallow. It's kind of a dull brown swallow. But what's distinctive about the bank swallow is its breast band, has a brown breast band. And then my favorite is the barn swallow, probably the most common swallow. And it has a swallowtail. It's a very long swallowtail. And it's the only one that has a long swallowtail. Now we're into the cliff swallow, which, similar to the barn swallow, has a reddish face, but it has a white forehead. The only one with a white forehead and a short square tail. Now, the northern rough-winged swallow is very similar to the bank swallow, and it's kind of a dull brown, but no breast bar. So you can see there's no breast bar up here, and it's kind of just white. And then we have beautiful tree swallow, and they're kind of a metallic blue on the back and head, and white underneath. And then we have the violet green, which is more distinguishable in that the back of the head is kind of greenish or violet, or the violet is more back here. And so you can see two different ones. This one on the left has, it's picking up nesting material. So this is the violet green swallow. You get white underneath. Now into the chickadees, the black cat chickadee. There are actually two chickadees. They have the mountain chickadee and the black cap chickadee, but the one that you'll see in Boise will be the black cap chickadee, and you can see its distinctive black cap. And then this picture was taken at a cemetery, and this is a brown creeper, and it just blends right into the tree. Very hard to spot, but you'll see them crawling up a tree and then down a tree. It's one of the only birds that if it's crawling down the tree, it's a brown creeper, because no other bird will go down. All the rest of them creep upward on a tree. And of course, it's finding insects in the bark. This is a house wren. And one of the ways that you can tell it's a house wren is they are very chatty, very noisy. And can't really tell on this tail, but it has a barred tail. And many times when they're perched horizontally, that tail will be upright. And then we have the red-breasted nuthatch. And again, it tends to be a little higher up, mostly in pine trees. And again, its flanks and its breast are reddish in color. And one of the cutest birds we have, and I swear these birds are on steroids because they're constantly moving. And this is the ruby-crowned kinglet. And the easiest way to spot them is by their kind of broken eye ring. So it has white on the front and back of the eye, and does have a wing bar. And it's called ruby crown because of this crown. But the only time you'll see that crown is if the bird is really excited or fighting with another male. It's with the males. And so, but you will normally see it like this without the crown. Now we're going to get into the thrushes. The American robin is a thrush, and it does have a white eye ring, and it does have kind of a brownish breast. And we find them mostly on lawns. They like grassy areas. And you'll see them on the grass, and they'll kind of cock their head. And Lisa always says they're listening for worms. I'm not sure they can hear a worm, but sure enough, they'll be out there. They'll kind of tilt their head, and then the next thing you know, they'll be after a worm, and they'll be pulling a worm out of the grass. And this is a gray catbird. You'll find this in bushes and trees, and it has a reddish rump. It's all gray. It's an all gray dull bird with a reddish rump. And then this is a cedar waxwing, and it has kind of a Lone Ranger mask, as you can see. Not really a big bird, smaller than a robin, but the tail is very distinctive yellow, and the tips of the wings here have red, hence cedar waxwing. And by the way, they always fly in groups, never alone. Now we're going to get into what I call the icterids. It's a large family. And this is another immigrant from England. And they were brought to the United States because some aficionado of Shakespeare saw them mentioned in his books, and so brought them to breed here in the United States. And they've spread throughout the United States. And I've noted they are a common and widespread pest. Farmers hate them because they eat so many seeds. But they're kind of they'll look like a black bird with a yellow bill. And when they fly, the wing pattern is a delta or triangular shape pattern. But the male in breeding is actually quite colorful. Then we have a brewer's blackbird, shiny black with a yellow eye, and the female is kind of a dull brown with a black eye. And then we have the brown-headed cowbird, and shiny black, but a distinctive brown head. And then the female is a lighter grayish brown. And then our most common blackbird is the red-winged blackbird. And they do have a little bit of yellow, the adults do. And then the female doesn't look like a blackbird at all. In fact, first time I spotted one, I thought I'd found a new species. But later I was told that that's the female blackbird. And then probably in June, we'll start getting the yellow-headed blackbird. And they're a beautiful bird. This is a male. And I can't remember the scientific name, but the genus and species names are the same name. And again, beautiful bird, ugly call. It just seems weird that it would have such an ugly call. Okay. Then we have, this is a very common bird, and I apologize for the picture because they're so common, and yet I couldn't find a very good picture of the Bullock's oriole. And they make, orioles make a sack-like nest that will hang from the branches. Okay? And so they were actually separated out from the Baltimore oriole. And now there's talk of maybe combining the two orioles again, because they will interbreed. This is a western meadowlark. And it is nectarid, and it has kind of a victory breast, if you will. Now we'll get into the house finches. Our most common finch is the house finch. And males will be reddish, like that. And then right now we're getting the American goldfinch, bright yellow like this in the summer. And this is its yellow, its winter dress. And this is the lesser goldfinch. And it has a dark back and a bright yellow breast. The male does. And this is evening grosbeak. And they call them grosbeaks, but they're really not in the grosbeak family. I know, it's getting close. This is a pine siskin. You generally find them high in the trees. Now we're getting into the warblers. This is the common yellowthroat. Find it in the marsh. And it has a Lone Ranger mask, yellow breast. And then the yellow warbler will have, the male will have these orangey streaks. And then we have the yellow rump warbler. It's also called the butterbutt because the back rump part will be yellow. It also is yellow on the wings and on the throat, and a little bit of yellow on the head. And this warbler is here year-round. And the yellow-breasted chat for years has been considered a warbler. Now they've decided to put it in its own family, but very bright breast. much larger than the other warblers. Now into the sparrows. This is the chipping sparrow. It has kind of a rapid fire chip sound and reddish head, no stripes. And house sparrow, which is actually a finch from England, is probably one of our most common sparrows. And then the common indigenous bird would be the song sparrow, which has stripes on the breast part and a dark spot in the middle. And it generally has a two-chip call and then a trill. And this is a migratory bird that comes through. One of the largest sparrows, plain belly and breast, but a black and white crown. And its bill is orange. We also have a larger bird called the spotted towhee. There are many towhees, but one we get is the spotted towhee here in Idaho. And it's black on top. And it's kind of skulky, mostly in brushy habitat. And then in the winter, we get the dark-eyed junco, or also the Oregon junco. They're very common. And I think its head and upper body are all black, the male, whereas the female is gray. And then we get the Western tanager. It's the only one that's called tanager that we get here in Idaho. And a few years ago, they decided that it really isn't a tanager after they did genetic studies on it. But a beautiful bird. And we have the lazuli bunting. It has kind of a grosbeak, kind of a bell, but very beautiful. Now I say lazuli, some people say lazuli, but I'll stick with lazuli. And then we have the black-headed grosbeak, which you can see has a much thicker bill, has a darker bill. And we do get these in the summertime. And then the end. And we have I decided to get this cormorant swallowing a fish as the end.
I need to say a few words.
Okay, now Lisa wants to take over again.
Thank you, thank you. Great, I wanted to thank everyone for attending today, and I wanted to thank our presenter. And before we let you go, I did want to mention that in your chat, I put the information for the Golden Eagle Audubon Society. There was a question about how to join the Wednesday birding groups, and just go to the website and you can find out how to join any of the field trips, including the Wednesday, and they're all free. It's a great group to belong to. And there will be, the presentation will be available on YouTube very shortly. So absolutely, you can watch it again. And if you're interested, someone just asked if they could get a copy of the presentation. Are you willing to share?
Sure.
Probably the best way to get a copy of the presentation, if maybe too large to email, is to contact the presenter. His email is dr, like Dr. dr.sapiens, SAPIENS @gmail.com. I also wanted to mention that there are some great upcoming classes next week. There's going to be an introduction to diamond art painting, camping on a tank of gas, composition for cell phone photographers, and homemade pasta making 101. These are 4 classes next week. You can sign up for them. They're free. And I hope you will consider taking additional classes. So once again, thank you, Steve Ledbetter, for hosting, and Alexander Sapiens for the presentation. And let me just check to see if there are any other questions. I don't. One of the questions is, are the birds native to Idaho named by Idahoan birders?
No,
No. Probably, where do all the names come from? From ornithologists?
I think mostly from ornithologists.
Yeah, from ornithologists. But there's just a great body of knowledge to be learned about birding. And it is sure a fun activity that you can do anywhere in the world, as we have learned. So
I
once
did have
again,
another comment.
yeah, okay, one more comment.
Okay, one comment that I had, it had to do with the Peregrine Fund and Peregrine Falcon, because the people here in Idaho helped set up the World Center for Birds of Prey, which is south of Boise, which you should go see if you've not gone to see it and support it. But we're the ones who basically brought the Peregrine Fund back from near extinction, as well as the California condor. And I believe they have something like 50 breeding pairs of condors there. And then when they become adults, then they take them to different places throughout the Western United States and release them. And so we brought the California condor back from extinction. And so if you want to see a California condor, the best place to see one is right here in Boise at the World Center for Birds of Prey.
Thank you again, everyone, for attending, and hope to see you in another NKA class. Thank you.